So do carbs make you fat? Let's get down to it. We want to know. We're going to find out today on Table Talk. Well, welcome to Table Talk by Uplift Fitness, where we clarify all things food, dieting, and your next steps to live the fit and healthy life you deserve. So today, we're talking about carbs. There's been a lot of talk in the fitness space for the last year or so, especially in the last year or so, I should say, just about carbohydrates. And truth is, a lot of us really don't know what they are. Are they sugar? Are they fiber? Are they both? Where do they play in our diet? Should we eat them? What happens when we eat too much of them? Are they evil? Are they not? We've heard everything from so many different camps. So today we're going to give you the complete rundown on carbohydrates, whether or not you should be eating very much of them, how much, all those things that you are curious about, and help clarify your next steps, like we say, to the fit and healthy life that you deserve as it pertains to your diet. I think in 4 episodes now, have not been able to stay away from training, stay only on diet, but we'll see if we can do that today. Probably not. So first things first, what are carbohydrates? Well, carbohydrates are a macronutrient. That is just like protein and fat. Protein is a macronutrient just like fat is a macronutrient. Now, people oftentimes get macronutrients and calories like they're two different things. A calorie tells us the energy we get from a food. A macronutrient tells us what those calories do in our body. So for example, 1 gram of carbohydrate yields 4 calories worth of energy. Same goes for protein. 1 gram of protein yields 4 calories of energy. And now fat is a little bit more calorie dense per gram, not a bad thing, but coming in around 9 calories per gram. So that's essentially what a carbohydrate is, and they're usually utilized best for energy. And our body can make its own carbohydrates in certain scenarios, and that is neither a good nor a bad thing. Sometimes that has been demonized. I know a lot of times in the keto community, a lot of the hardcore keto zealots talk about gluconeogenesis, which is basically the production of glucose, or the simplified form of carbohydrate inside of our body from protein, from fatty acids. It's actually a good thing. If that didn't happen, well, you would die. So that is a very good thing, and it's not doesn't just because your blood sugar comes up from that doesn't mean that's a bad thing. So all carbohydrate in all forms, even if it comes from an internal source via gluconeogenesis, that big fancy word, doesn't mean that they're evil. So how are they different from those other macronutrients? Well, they just have a different chemical makeup. Like we said, they're better for energy production. Now, there's a thing with your carbohydrates. They have a wide range of different carbohydrates, and we usually look at those based on their digestion rate. So if you've heard of the glycemic index, that's where this comes from. We're going to touch on that just in a minute, and also in future videos. But that is also the same as fats. There's different fats with different fatty acids that do very, very different things in the body. Same with proteins. Proteins are made up of different amino acids. So we can have multiple different proteins with very different structures of their amino acids, which is important when we talk about things like building muscle, boosting your metabolism, having a lean, healthy physique. Plant protein, in that case, doesn't have the amino acids required to do those things. They're completely inferior to animal products such as steak, eggs, fish, things of that nature. And then the same thing, look at olive oil versus grapeseed oil on your fat side. Those are two very, very different things. They're both fats. They both have 9 calories per gram. They both fall in that category, but they do very different things. So when we get back to carbohydrates, you've probably heard that like something like a simple carb as closer to sugar is not a very great thing to be consuming. While that is true, you have the other end of the spectrum, which is fiber, which doesn't really even digest inside of our body. And we're not going to get into fiber today because I will go off on a big tangent with fiber. But the thing about carbohydrates is they are easily overeaten. This is why they are demonized, is because typically they're very tasty because they are on that sugar end, but they're just so easy to eat. You can take 100 grams worth of carbohydrates, so not 100 grams by weight, but 100 grams of the actual carbohydrate. And sometimes people get that confused because the measurement looks like it's the same, but Carbohydrate, you can eat 100 grams. That looks like a big bowl of cereal and be pretty much okay and not really satiated. You can eat a lot more of that. You take 100 grams worth of protein, you're talking, what would that be? I think 12, 14, maybe 16 ounces of steak. You're gonna feel really, really full. Obviously it has the fat in there as well, but you're gonna feel really full, even if it was something lean like chicken. After eating that, protein is very satiating, so we're not really gonna overeat on protein. A lot of times I can tell some of my clients that protein is free calories as long as it is a lean protein or a protein comes from a whole food source like steak, or stay away from cheeseburgers because then we get into the bun and the cheese and all that stuff as well. But carbohydrates easily overeaten, and that really gets into why carbohydrates are quote unquote evil, why they are such a problem for so many people. But that doesn't mean that if you control them that they're bad. Now we talked about the glycemic index. Now the glycemic index, like I mentioned, is the rate of which the carbohydrates digest. So if you eat something that is I don't know if it's high or low, I couldn't even tell you at this point, the sugar that digests really, really fast, the kind of thought process there has always been, well, that's going to spike your insulin a lot, and maybe that's true, but other carbohydrates may as well. Depends on the metabolic health of the individual. But what we can all agree on, no matter what, is if the load is not high enough, it won't cause what's called a phase 2 insulin response. I know that's a little sciencey, but there is a difference between a phase 1, phase 2, and even phase 3 insulin response. Protein causes a phase 1 insulin response, and that's not a bad thing at all. Now, the phase 2 insulin response and into 3 is where we get some of the issues when they happen chronically, every day, all the time, plus we're under stress, which raises our blood sugar and all those other things. And we're under muscled, so inability to handle sugar because our sponge that soaks all that up in our muscle isn't very big, or we never wring it out via doing strength training. So carbohydrates easily overeaten, and then the load gets too high. For most people, that looks like around 30 to 40 grams. That's pretty standard. It can be lower, it can be higher. If you're cautious, stay on the underside about that, and that makes it pretty easy. We talked about meal frequency a little bit ago, and talked about protein optimization and how getting the right number of grams of protein per meal was important, at least once you pass that threshold. Now you can also pair this information with that when you're building your meals to keep your carbohydrates under that threshold so you're not getting that insulin response. And they're not really evil. It's very rarely when we're preparing our food that we put too many carbohydrates in our prepped meals, our healthy meals, quote unquote, that we prepare through the day. It's usually the snack cakes in the kitchen, the really, really tasty things, or the French fries from the fast food, and also obviously all the polyunsaturated fatty acids that they cook your food in, and is really, really terrible and really drives diabetes. So a lot of bad stuff there, but all that boils down to is controlling your carbohydrate load. And then honestly, the index doesn't matter as much, but there's always the psychological piece, and that the closer usually they get down to that index, on that index towards a simple sugar or just plain sugar, then they're a lot more addicting. They kind of have that dopamine hit that goes up here in our brain and makes us crave them. So when we get into cravings, that is a different animal. When we're just talking physiologically, black and white, not the human factor, which messes everything up, it's the load. It's the load first, and if we can control that, we're not eating 17 times a day with that 40 grams, and carbs are way out of the ballpark at that point. You're gonna be okay. So carbohydrates are not evil. Now, what about the keto diet? What about the ketogenic diet? So many people, it works so well for them. So you're going to tell me that carbs weren't the factor there because I cut out all my carbs? Well, first of all, 90% of the people that I encounter, and I'm not talking bad about anybody, but most of the people that I encounter that are on the ketogenic diet don't know what macronutrients are. And if you don't even know what protein, fats, and carbs are, you just know don't eat bread, don't eat pasta, and don't eat sugar, don't eat pop, because that's bad for you apparently. It's really a fear-driven thing a lot of times with that as well, and that's not a good framework to have around your food. It's not a good relationship to have with your diet. Ketogenic dieting works for those people because that's the most of their calories. If you're getting 70, 80% of your calories every single day from sugar and processed carbohydrates and even whole food carbohydrates, you're getting way too many of your calories. Well, we just removed not only a ton of overly processed foods, and maybe somebody gets more towards a whole food diet, though we've seen that not happen, but you removed a huge chunk of their calories. Of course you're gonna lose weight, but that slows down your metabolism. You get a lot of metabolic damage from there, and maybe that is good for insulin purposes, but kind of get into trouble when we talk about doing that long term. It's not a healthy place to be, especially when we see muscle wasting, sarcopenia. When the muscles start to shrink, now you're in trouble. Now you're in real trouble, especially with your insulin. Your metabolic sink just got super small, so we have some big issues there. But really why that's working is that we're removing unprocessed foods, we're cutting our calories with a little bit, which is not your good first step for most people. Unfortunately, many also turn down towards all these sugar-free additives and keep in the processed foods and just go the sugar-free route, which is terrible in high amounts, and we're going to talk on that in future videos. But main thing, it removes a lot of calories, but it doesn't optimize the protein, and cutting calories drastically is bad news. Now, carbohydrate control is calorie control. It's the same thing we talked about in the beginning of today's table talk, was that carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram. So if you're cutting out 100 grams of carbohydrates, you're dropping 400 calories a day. Many people eat 200, 300, you can see as high as 400 grams of carbs per day. Now I've done that and while working out a lot and gone up to 500 grams of carbohydrate per day and gained 0 body fat. And that's just because of the way I was training, my programming, and the other pieces of my nutrition that were in line there. But you can also overeat on protein. You can overeat on fat too, which means it has nothing to do with carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are not evil. You need to control the load, and hopefully they're coming from whole food sources and you're only eating what you need. So to wrap that entire thing up, there's no reason that you have to do a ketogenic diet or completely cut out all your carbs. I do agree cutting out sugar is probably a good thing, but it's probably a better thing just to focus on getting more whole foods in, and hopefully those things kind of fall by the wayside. Plus there's always a psychological piece, and that can get very messy. But that's it for today's table talk. If you learned something, comment what you learned down below. That helps us know exactly what kind of content to prepare for you guys in the future. And please, please, please share this video. It helps us out so much. We love doing these, love being able to do them for free, and that's one of the things that helps us do that. So if you learned something, tag a friend, leave a comment, let us know what you learned, and also share the video, and we will see you next time on Table Talk.